with Abe Baldonado.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Chile Wire. This week, I am honored to introduce my guests, Sam and Raul Vigil. Sam, Raul, thank you so much for coming on the Chile Wire today. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Good. Thank you.
Wonderful.
We're honored to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show. And I think we're going to have a lot to talk about today. Raul, you're a former state police officer, retired now. And just want to, it's National First Responders Day. So I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Protecting our community. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, gentlemen, we're in the midst of a mayoral election right now. And one of the big things that isn't being talked about by our mayor is crime or any fixes or any solutions that he's done to address crime. And to me, it seems like crime has gotten worse over the years, and not just in Albuquerque, but throughout our state. And I know a lot of our legislators try to say it's an Albuquerque issue. I think it's a statewide issue. Oftentimes we see a lot of critics say, well, every state has crime. That's true. But in a state that's our size, the amount of crime that we see per capita is significant. And, I want people to hear your story, because what has frustrated me over the years is that there's been a lot of emphasis on the criminals. What did they go through that led them to become criminals? And there's a lot of sympathy. And, we hear people use the word empathy a lot, and they're trying to be empathetic towards a criminal. But what frustrates me is that we're not being sympathetic to the families, to the victims who have been, impacted by crimes. And we don't hear enough of those voices. And I think it's going to be really important for people to hear your story today and your experience, because you've lived it. You've lived someone's worst nightmare, what we all think about with our families. You all have gone through it. And I think it's important for people to realize that we need to really think about the families who have been impacted because of criminals, not the other way around. But just want to open it up to you all to just share, your story. I know, Raul, we've had the chance to talk offline, but I think it's going to be important for New Mexicans to hear this perspective, because I don't think there's enough of it going around where victims are, and there's some great organizations where victims and their families have now started building coalitions, but it's still not loud enough. And I think we need to make that louder, that, hey, we're here and we're demanding to see a difference in our communities.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about my wife's story, I guess. Jacqueline Vigil. She was actually murdered back in 2019. And to me, it was an avoidable murder that could have been avoided if only sanctuary city policies would not have been in place. I think my wife would be alive today. I think she'd be probably talking to me. I probably wouldn't be here.
Be out enjoying a nice lunch, having coffee.
Yeah. But the person that killed her had a long criminal history in Albuquerque, going all the way back to 2006. And I can read that to you if you want me to. I don't know if you want me to go.
Yeah, Sam, I think it's important because at the end of the day, repeat offenders has been a problem that has plagued our state. And a lot of folks have said, well, a lot of these offenders, they're petty misdemeanors until they're not. And reading the rap sheet of this individual, I think it's important for people to listen. This was a clear indication that he had always been violent. Like there were charges against him that he has always been violent. And yet, again, he was always let out and never charged and was, again, back in our streets. And in addition to the sanctuary policies, we talked a little bit about this offline, but, while many immigrants' intentions are good of coming here, there's a lot of folks that want just a better life. Absolutely. Unfortunately, there's criminal empires that want to exploit that and use it for their own benefit to wreak havoc on communities. And that's through drug trafficking, human trafficking. And Raul, I'm sure you have stories during your time as a state police officer that we'd love to just kind of hear about that. But to me, I feel like a lot of those people hide behind the sanctuary policies because they know this is a safe haven for us to commit crimes, and they're not going to go after us.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what happened to my wife. The the man that killed her probably felt really safe in Albuquerque, where he could do just about anything that he wanted to do, you know.
Well, and given his rap sheet, he was always just let off the hook.
Right.
Yep, that's true.
So
But let me
disappointing.
just read a little bit about you know his criminal history that goes back all the way to 2006. Okay, we'll start with April 16th of 2008. He was charged with battery on a household member, telephone harassment, battery on a household member. He was deported on November 7th of 2008. He was back in Albuquerque on November the 15th, 2008, charged with on the same day with aggravated stalking. On November the 26th, 2008, he was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. January the 6th, 2009, charged with receiving stolen property over $2,500. March 12th of 2009, indicted for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, shooting at an occupied building, shooting into or from a vehicle. At that time, he was, I guess, to the best of my knowledge, I think he was caught up in Colorado, was arrested there for eluding a police officer. He was in jail or in prison or was sentenced for 8 years. He served about 4 years of that charge, of the 8 years that he was supposed to be behind bars. He was released on September the 5th, 2019, and he was deported to Mexico. He was back in Albuquerque by September the 30th. On that same day, he broke into a truck that was parked at the Hyatt Hotel, stole a 9mm.
Millimeter.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
It couldn't come out. But anyway, and other property, DNA and fingerprints matched the killer. They ran him through their database, I guess the police, and they knew who he was, and I would think that with the long criminal history that he had, that they would have said, well, this guy is not a good guy, he probably doesn't belong out on the streets, so we do something like that. But anyway, on October 31st, he had an altercation with another man at an apartment complex. The man tried to get away from for whatever reason and drove his car out. The killer and another associate of his followed him, shooting at the vehicle, putting bullet holes in the back of the trunk of the individual that was trying to get away. He got away, but he was lucky that he didn't get killed. October 29th, the killer posted photographs of the guns that he had stolen on Facebook. For sale guns, and again, you would think that they know who this guy is. They know what he's doing, To me, any logical, any reasonable person that would see this kind of behavior on his part would say this man does not belong out on the streets. He's doing damage to the community. He doesn't belong there. Openly selling the guns on Facebook. November the 19th, just a few days after that, he kills my wife. He drives up to, I will never forget this. It was the early morning of the 19th, around probably, we would get up real early. My wife liked to go to the gym every day before she went to work. And so we would get up at 4:30, 15 to 5, and she would always get ready, come downstairs, and tell me, well, I'll be back in an hour. And grab a bowl of fruit and get in the car and try to move. That morning, I heard the garage door open because I was sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee. And all of a sudden, I heard the honk on the car. And I thought, at that moment, she probably forgot her ID card for the gym or something else, So I thought, I better go out there and see what she wants. When I opened the garage door, the door from the kitchen to the garage, I saw this Jeep blocking her car, not letting her completely pull out of the garage. And I thought, even then, maybe maybe it's the paper guy, but it was
Yeah.
kind of weird that he's blocking my wife, and because I didn't hear the shot, I didn't hear so I kept walking, and I saw this guy running like crazy, getting on the Jeep, pulling back as far or as fast as they could, and taking off. I didn't think they were going to make the corner. There was a sharp corner where I lived, and I thought, man, they're not going to make it, but they did, But as I got closer to the car, the bullet hole on the window on the driver's side, he had shot her in the head, and got away. He took off, and if it hadn't been for, in my opinion, it hadn't been for President Trump and this Project Legend, that he initiated, then got the FBI involved with the case. A really good agent, I have a lot of respect for him. I won't mention his name because I don't have permission from him to do that. But I think he's the best of the best. You can't find anybody better than that. And I think he's got a really good reputation among all law enforcement people,
And
because of
I'm
his
sure
work.
he's become a dear friend of y'all's as well.
Oh, absolutely. I know my dad stays in contact with him still. That's the type of person he is. But he went above and beyond, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah, he is. He's the best. I just, a few weeks or a few days after he got involved, they arrested the guy in San Antonio, and it wasn't for the murder of my wife, but it was federal charges. I think it was probably entering the country illegally again. But yeah, after that, things begin to roll. And
But it took almost about 2 years, right, before he was formally charged from when he murdered Jackie to that point. And that's a really long time. And, I think about that, it seemed like it took maybe the president mobilizing his resources to really dig down deep. I mean, just curious, like, had the case kind of stalled locally on the investigation, and that's why it took the president to mobilize his folks from the FBI to track down the murderer.
I think we could agree that it did kind of slow down, right? There were some things that kind of came up that prevented the case from going forward, and I don't know if you have more about that, but
what happened was some other person actually, I guess, confessed, that he was the one, and when he wasn't, the guy didn't have anything to do with it, wasn't even close to where the murder happened, but I think that kind of stalled the whole case for a while. But again, thanks to President Trump for putting resources behind it, and getting the FBI agent involved in it, because again, that's when things really begin to happen. The guy did finally get convicted. He got a 30-year life sentence for 30 years in New Mexico, which in my opinion is not a life sentence. The ones that have a life sentence is people like me or victims like me. We, when our loved ones are killed, they're not going to come back. Some of these criminals that will walk the streets again, they'll get out, and some of them not even the 30 years, But yeah, it's the justice system, I think, needs to be rehauled. I think that a life sentence should be a real life sentence. Just like we as victims have to live a life.
Yeah, it's a life sentence for you all, and the tragedy that you suffered. It's a life sentence that you have to carry with you, and that's a very difficult way to carry on your shoulder. And I couldn't even imagine. And unfortunately, there are many families around New Mexico that have gone through this same experience. And I don't know how many of them are willing to talk about it as you two gentlemen are here, but I really think it's important for more of those voices to start being proactive and saying, hey, we need some real accountability here. The system is broken, and let's call it for what it is. It is broken. We have public officials who do not want to address these problems. They want to believe that we live in a fairy tale and crime isn't that bad, and the tragedies are just exaggerated. And I think that's an insult to the families who have to live with this every single day.
I think you're right, but on that same note, I think people are starting to realize how bad things are getting. I really, really believe this. It's slowly getting there, and when it comes back to like people, in government and the people that make these decisions and create these policies, it's disappointing to say the least. But that's why I want to circle back and talk about President Trump really quickly. And I really want to say, regardless of how people feel, the truth is the truth. He really stepped it up for us, and we are very grateful for him.
And on that note, you all got to sit down with the president. Am I correct? Yeah.
Yes.
You guys actually got to sit down with the president. It wasn't his staff or any of his folks that you talked to. You actually sat down with the president and had a conversation about this.
Yeah. And I'll never forget when we met with him at the White House, one of the first things I told him is, "Sir, it's an honor to meet you. Thank you for having us here." And he told me, no, Raul. He goes, "The honor's mine." He goes, "I'm the one that invited you here." And it really made me respect him more because he knew the gravity of the situation that was at hand. I mean, and he also said, "You know what? I'm going to give you guys the resources you need. We're going to make sure to find this guy." And he stuck with his word. Yeah. He really meant what he said, and he followed through with it. And that's why, regardless of what anybody says, we have great respect for President Trump. We're very thankful for him. He's a man of his word. He came through for us, right, Ed? And I just want to make that point. It's important, especially, like you made a great point. A lot of politicians and a lot of lawmakers are more concerned about the criminals, right? Mm-hmm. Poor this guy. What caused him to do this, that? And I think when it comes to victims of violent crime or survivors, I think that we're forgotten. And that's why I encourage my dad too to continue talking about this, and what we definitely want is to make sure it never happens again to anybody else.
Absolutely. I think as much it's difficult sometimes to talk about it, but I think it's necessary to bring it out, to tell people what it really happened, and how dangerous, in my opinion, sanctuary city policies are. Yeah. I don't think a lot of people realize that, the police are not to arrest people according to the resolution that they passed back in 2018 or 19. Anyway, it was, it spells out very clearly, that they're not cooperating with any other or with the federal law enforcement people, and that's dangerous. You know, that's very dangerous.
And there's pros and cons in everything, but you really have to look at what are the consequences here of this policy. And yes, could it be well intended? Absolutely. But what are the consequences? What is actually happening? And I think we're seeing it now. Just the other day, we saw the human trafficking event here in Albuquerque, where they found an individual who was harboring individuals from Mexico and holding them at ransom. Yeah. And these are poor families who probably wanted to come here and just get away from crime and poverty and try to make something for themselves here. But now they're being held ransom by their own people, which is shocking to me.
Yeah, and we want to make it clear that we're not against immigration, right? We know that's when it's done right, when it's gone, when they go through the proper channels, and the immigrants come here to be a productive member of society. It's a great thing. We know that. We believe in that. Obviously, our situation is a lot different, and my dad read out, pretty much all the charges and
this
crimes.
Wasn't a law-abiding citizen.
No,
this was a repeat violent offender who was roaming our streets.
So it makes you ask yourself the question: well, why would the local authorities not want to cooperate with the feds in order to take someone like this off the streets? It just blows our mind.
Yeah. Or even if they don't want to turn him over to ICE, arrest the guy, you know.
Yeah, at least arrest him.
Yeah,
Charge
this
him.
guy was raising hell. He was a
He was
danger,
terrorizing
trying
the
to kill
community.
somebody, you know.
I mean, shooting at other cars, battery. I
Yeah.
mean, domestic violence. I mean,
It's all over the
those
place.
those aren't minor crimes. I mean, those are severe charges, and I think anyone who just common sense. I think we have to go back to common sense. With common sense says
Yeah.
this is going to progressively get worse. If he's already committing crimes like this, it's only a matter of time until it is even worse, in which it happened.
And I wanted to add just my wife was an immigrant. She was from Colombia. She came in the legal way, you know, and she was also. She said, "I left America after she got her citizenship. She wanted to be a school teacher, and she had enrolled in CNN, I believe, at the time. I don't know if it's still CNN or
That's great.
Yeah, it's still seeing it.
and she had 2 years in, and then she wanted to transfer over to UNM. That was her dream, you know, and that was the way. She says that's my dream, and that's what I want to do, you know. And she was working on it. She was working really hard. She would go to class at night after work, come back home, try to do lessons in between, you know, going to bed and then having to get up early in the morning and that kind of stuff. But yeah, she was an immigrant that wanted to live the American dream, you know.
Well, and I'm a former educator, so hearing that part of Jackie's story that she wanted to be an educator is truly amazing, just because she wanted to give back. She wanted to work with kids and create the next generation of future leaders and just, provide them with the skills necessary. And what a beautiful story that is that was her intentions of coming here.
Right. Yeah. It's unbelievable if you think about it, because you're talking about, on one side, someone coming to this country to terrorize it, and versus someone that's coming here to be part of it, to contribute to it, and their paths met on November 19th in a horrible way. And it's again, the reason we bring that up a lot is because, again, we're not against immigration. We know we want immigration. It's good when it's done correctly. It's just when you have criminals and you have people terrorizing our community and there's no accountability for it, that's a big problem.
The first step is admitting it, right? Admitting you have a problem. And with that, you do have a problem. When you have open borders and you have lax border security, you end up having criminals flood communities. And I mean, you see it in Texas, you see it in Arizona, you see it here in New Mexico. I mean, we had a podcast a few weeks ago with Rudy Mora, who's a former.
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, with Rudy, and Rudy telling us the stories of just even how cartels and a lot of these criminal organizations exploit police officers and, attack their families. And then these police officers are now subject to being charged when they had a great career, but in order to protect their families, they, locked arms with these criminal organizations and, they got held accountable for it. And, it's an unfortunate thing that is happening, and it's actually plaguing our communities. And I think it would be wrong of us to deny that it's even happening. And I get frustrated when I see leaders trying to deny it. And, you and I chatted about where Albuquerque ranks statistically when it comes to crimes per capita. And I mean, we're up there with some of the most notorious cities across the world. I mean, in South America, and the Middle East. I mean, it's shocking.
Yeah. And that's what blew my mind is when I first saw that statistic, I thought, okay, that's in the nation, right? Which is bad enough. But when they said, no, this is in the world, you're in the top 20 most violent cities in the world, it's unbelievable.
It's kind of a shock to me. I just happened to be scrolling on my computer, and I thought, well, and it came up, and I thought, no, it can't be. Maybe the U.S., and no, it was the world. And I thought, well, I wonder what happened to all the other, countries that where there's war going on, and things like that. And it just really, it would make anybody think, or it made me think, and I think it would make anybody think, well, what is really happening, How do you get to that point, where 20th most violent. You know.
Well, and I think there's a lot of issues, right? We look at education, we rank dead last. You know, I think a lot of it, when you see criminals, many of them are reading at a third grade proficiency level. You know, so a lot of it has to do with education, is that we see without a very strong education system, you tend to have a stronger leaning towards people going down a bad road and ultimately becoming criminals.
Absolutely. I think, the education, we're one of the poorest states in the nation.
Which is crazy because we're not a poor state, right? Like we're not a poor state. I mean, we have abundant resources here. We are flooding with money from our wonderful oil and natural gas production in southeast and northwest New Mexico. But government, to me, has failed. Like our elected leaders, our policymakers are failing. And, I think we have to call it for what it is. Democrats have been in control for many decades, and we've actually seen a decline, and we haven't seen, I always tell people, I'm like, it's hard to blame Republicans for the problems because Republicans have never been in full control of New Mexico. So
to be fair,
I can't come on the podcast and say Republicans are to blame, because when I look at the data and I actually look at who's actually been running New Mexico since statehood, Democrats have primarily been in control, and Republicans have only had maybe 3 times where they've had, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the governorship. And so it's really hard to place blame and say, well, it's Republicans. They're not doing it. But that's not, in fact, the case. Unfortunately, we have to look at, and now we see it even nationally with progressive movements in like New York, and, just some of the stuff I'm hearing on like criminals, like just ultimately, like, they're not really a criminal. Something happened and we need to treat them better, and we need to, and I'm like, wait, what? No, like, there's right and wrong.
Exactly.
Like at the end of the day, I mean, if when you're born and raised, you are taught that there's right and wrong, there's good and evil. And, if you choose one or the other, I mean, it's a choice you're making.
Yeah. And then just going back on New Mexico being, I think I heard the figure like $64 billion, something like that.
Yeah, we're not a poor state. And now, we're hearing with the SNAP benefits coming up that a quarter of our citizens are on SNAP benefits. I mean, that should be shocking to people, and not that people don't need it. Welfare programs are great for folks who fall on hard times. We know that individuals will fall on hard times. But when it becomes a lifestyle or it becomes generational, it's not sustainable. When I think that, almost 40% of our state's on Medicaid, another welfare program. I mean, to me, that's not sustainable. And it's not that I'm saying kick these people off, but what I'm saying is it's not healthy. It's not healthy for our economic development. It's not sustainable for our future as a state.
Exactly. And we should be looking at having better economic development programs, companies that come into and so that we can give some of these people some meaningful jobs that pay well, to get off some of that giveaway type of programs that
or
we
get
have.
off the streets, right? Like going back to, our big conversation today, a life of crime.
Oh, yeah.
You think about taking people out of poverty. I mean, that's one way you combat crime. You combat it through with taking people out of poverty.
Exactly. 100%. Sure. And then getting back to, we were talking about the Democrats and the Republicans, and, I think one of the interesting things that we talk about, especially me and my dad, is, born and raised here, and it's almost ingrained that we should be Democrats.
Yeah.
And sometimes for the longest time, I know that was what we were, but I'm telling you that after everything that's happened and the way things are going, we started realizing the party doesn't align with our values. We're very conservative, and I think most people are, but I think it's
Hispanic
just
specifically. We're through our traditional values and through our religious beliefs as Catholics and Christians. I mean, we're strong in our faith here in New Mexico, and it's a beautiful thing. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I remember growing up, a lot of the elders, when I was little, I remember idolize JFK. And I tell people today, today's Democratic Party is not that of JFK.
It's not even close.
Well,
Yeah.
a little story, when after Jackie, I was a Democrat all my life. I would almost straight Democrat. Every time I go to cast my ballot, that was. And when Jackie was murdered, I thought, well, I'm gonna try to get a hold of my rep, my state rep, my state senator. And I want to talk to the mayor, to see if I can be of some help with.
What can we do to fix this problem that we're facing?
Nobody would call me back.
Wow.
They wouldn't talk to me.
That's so unfortunate. And people wonder why, I've heard this I had students who believed that voting didn't make a difference. And I was like, no, it does. Like, you have to remember your elected officials work for you. Like,
Exactly.
you don't work for them. They work for you. You elect them. And you could easily remove them from office if you just start paying attention. And are they doing their job? And I wish I could say I'm surprised, Sam, that they didn't call you back, but I'm also not surprised.
I called the mayor. I talked to a couple of people there. They said, well, we'll get back with you, and I called maybe a couple of 2 or 3 times, trying to and I finally gave up. I called Heinrich and nothing.
Wow.
Never got nothing from him, I talked to, or rather left messages for a lot of the other state reps from my area, and actually from out of the area too. The only one that called me back was Ortiz y Pino.
Oh, yeah. Senator Ortiz y Pino.
I left a message for him, and he called me back, which is, I was really surprised, because he's not even in my district. But I was calling anybody because I wanted to be part of the solution rather than the problem, He called me back, and we had a conversation. I probably didn't agree with me, but I have to respect him for.
Yeah, he listened and had the conversation.
And, I have some respect for him because of that, But the rest of them, nothing, nada.
And again, I think that's important for people listening and watching this podcast is you have to pay attention to what folks are doing. And if they're not doing anything, you need to hold them accountable. The people we elect, if you're I think they're doing a good job. No, you need to find out, are they doing a good job or not? Have they done anything meaningful? Are they actually tackling the issues, or are they playing party politics and, joining the status quo? And we need to vote them out if they're not doing their job, what we elect them to do.
We do. And my concern is, like I was mentioning earlier, I think it's, it's ingrained, especially in us Hispanics, that we have to just vote Democrat all the time, regardless. And sometimes I feel like, a lot of these politicians know this, and they don't
like,
feel
I'm good. I'm good.
What are they going to do? They're going to vote for me regardless, right? Our states, we always talk about New Mexico. Being someone that was born and raised here, it's really sad and embarrassing to see our state at the bottom of everything that's supposed to be good and the top of everything that's supposed to be bad. I know that's been said over and over and over again, but I'm starting to wonder, are we just getting used to it? Is our community is this the norm? I don't, that's what's frustrating to me.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's frustrating because we know New Mexico is a beautiful state. We are rich in our culture and our traditions, and we are a melting pot of, Spanish settlement and Native American settlement. I mean, it's just, mixing those cultures together along with becoming part of the United States of America. We probably have one of the best mixed cultures in New Mexico of just traditions that have meshed with everything that's happened in the United States history, and New Mexico's history is just a blend of everything. And I'll tell you, you don't find it in any other states. And we have it here. And I think the frustrating thing is that we see that New Mexico is a beautiful place, but it has really grown in a lot of its problems. And it's frustrating because I saw a new study that showed the percentage of people actually born in New Mexico, how many of them are living in New Mexico, and it's around 50%. And I saw some people saying, oh, I thought this number would be higher. And I'm like, I didn't, because we are the biggest exporter of our people, because we've not created opportunities. We've not created prosperity here. I mean,
Exactly.
if you're not working for a state or federal job, or maybe for one of the universities across our state, I mean, job selection is pretty tight. I mean, there's not a whole lot of private sector growth out there. And the people that are in those roles aren't leaving them because they're great roles. And so why would they leave it? So you're not seeing openings for people to move around and get some career growth. So a lot of folks, are stuck working for state government and federal government and some of the other public institutions. But, we don't have that opportunity. So a lot of our people, I feel, and I had every opportunity to leave, and I'm glad I didn't, because I want to stay here and make New Mexico better and help it out. And I'm hoping the Chile Wire helps with that, just having conversations with folks like you on what can we do? What can we do to talk about this, but get more people talking about it? How do we get more people? Because we know us three alone can do it in here. Like, this is great, but what we need to do is we need to add another 10, 15 people saying, hey, did you hear Sam, Raul, and Abe's conversation? Like, we need to start talking about this. You all need to listen to this.
Especially young people like you guys. Old people like me, well,
we paid Sam a lot of money to call us young. So, Sam, thank you very much. That $20 bill worked. So thanks for calling us young. But no, I think you're exactly right. Younger people need to get involved. And again, I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, get involved, have a conversation. And, let's disagree. That's fine. But let's have a good conversation about it, and let's tackle solutions. And unfortunately, I don't hear the conversation around solutions today, and someone, we had a comment on our Chile Wire, one of our Chile Wire posts about, we're attacking Tim Keller, and they're like, well, people aren't get together and talking about solutions. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, let's talk about solutions. But if he's the mayor, why is he not delivering the solutions? So we need to criticize him. We need to, go on the record and say, hey, the mayor is just, everyone's seen the commercials, I'm sure, across New Mexico, but I've made parks better. Like, that's not the fix. Like, that's not the solution to crime, to education, to poverty, to homelessness. I don't think upgrading parks makes a difference. Like, cool, does it look great? Yeah. But what did it do for the individual living down the street who is barely making ends meet?
Yeah, its problems are huge, homelessness, crime, and I don't think he's made a dent on any of those, and I don't think he can. I don't think it's going to get any better if he's reelected again, which is possible. He's he's a professional politician to begin with, and that's all he's done all of his life. I don't think he's ever held a job outside of being a politically elected or appointed type of job.
Well, and I even think about it now, the fact that he's even up for a third term, I'm like, I think we need some term limits. I mean, we need term limits all the way to Congress. I mean, I'm a pro term limits guy. I'm like, look, after 20 years, hey, let someone new, younger come in. And
that is so spot on. Right?
But I think you're right. Another term of Keller, I don't think it makes Albuquerque any better.
It's concerning to be honest. I mean, but the way things are looking, I haven't looked at the polls. I don't know if you have that information, but something inside me tells me that he's going to probably win again.
There have been polls, and Mark Ronchetti and a few others have reported on these. Like, people do not like Keller. Like, he has a very high percentage of people that have a negative view of him. The problem is that there's so many other candidates that people don't really know. And so they don't know who to vote for outside of that. They know they don't like Keller, but they don't know any of the other candidates. So they're like, well, I don't know who to vote for. And, with ranked choice voting elections, they usually favor Democrats or incumbents like Mayor Keller. And so I think a lot of the thought is that because of the split of the votes, the way it's going to go is Keller may potentially win again, despite the high percentage of folks not being in favor of him winning again. It's just, then you go into a runoff and then you lose people right there. People don't go out to vote during a runoff. They'll vote the first time on election day, but to get them out and vote again is difficult. And so when you have a lower amount of people showing up, I mean, yeah, you run the risk of him getting there. But I was shocked. I want to say it was close to 70%, maybe even in the 60s of individuals polled that didn't have a favorable view of him.
Right.
Which is shocking. Which is shocking to me is that like a majority of residents in Albuquerque are not in favor of Keller, but he gets elected again. Like that would I would have to question everything. I'd be like, well, why? Like, and again, I think it goes back to like, are we just tolerant now, or are we just kind of, you know, hey, it is what it is, and I hope not.
I hope not either. But that's going back to what I said. It makes me worried that we've just gotten used to the way things are, and it's just
Yeah,
it's like. It is what it is, and people throw their hands up in the air and give up, and that's exactly what I don't want to happen. Again, all of us are from here. We were born here, raised here, and we want our families to be prosperous here. That's the main goal. I don't want, anybody else to be victims of crime or anything like that, for sure. Yeah.
I heard, and I can't verify it, but that Albuquerque was losing population. So I don't know if that's true or not.
I think New Mexico in general has either been stagnant or has declined in population. I mean, it's just economics. I mean, we don't have a whole lot here, so I think a lot of folks move to other states, and I think during COVID we saw a little bit of a tick of folks that were moving from the big cities coming to New Mexico, because for $1 million, you drop $1 million in California, you're in a 2-bedroom condo, but out here you get a whole nice piece of land. And so I think we saw some of that, but right. I think for the most part, New Mexico, Albuquerque has been pretty stagnant. And I don't know how much growth Albuquerque has, just because Albuquerque's kind of landlocked. You have the pueblos on each side of Albuquerque, so you really can't expand. And then to the west, you have the Zia Pueblo. You also have Acoma and Laguna, and I know they own a big piece of land out there that belongs to them. And so, I don't know how much growth Albuquerque has, and that's another problem, right?
Well, you made a great point earlier, like as far as economic prosperity here. What really drives the economy? I think it's only if you're gonna find a work in government or at the labs, for example, or in oil, and maybe now because Netflix or some film industry is coming in. Yeah. But aside from that, what else can we do, right? So
I mean, I think I had a good conversation with some folks around artificial intelligence, and I think data centers will be pretty big, and their reliance on natural gas is big. I think New Mexico could be a hub for that. I don't know, given New Mexico's political landscape, if they'd allow that. I mean, environmental groups will come out and say, no way, you're going to use all our fresh water and you're going to do this and that, and it's terrible for the environment. So I think, Democrats, unfortunately, won't allow for that to happen. But, I look at Albuquerque was the Simi Valley once upon a time. Think about it. We had Bill Gates here. We had Jeff Bezos through Amazon. I mean, imagine if those two organizations had been
That's a great point.
Kept here in New Mexico, but because we're not business friendly as far as the political policy goes, not political, but the business friendly through policy, where education is poor here. I always tell people, I'm like, look, we have to fix our education system. We need to turn it around. Like, Mississippi, we used to say, thank God for Mississippi. Now we can't even say that anymore.
I don't think we can.
And Mississippi stuck with a lot of the reforms that we were doing in the previous administration. And so when people ask, how did Mississippi turn it around? I'm like, well, they did everything we were doing, but we stopped doing. But they stayed course, and they actually added a few other programs to turn their education around. Mississippi is still a very impoverished state, but their education is turning around. I think with that, you might see the state eventually turn around too, as far as poverty goes. That's just going to take a few decades to see how that transpires. But I think we have to fix education, because if I'm a big business, why would I bring my business to New Mexico if I have to go recruit in Texas or Arizona? Why don't I just set up in Texas or Arizona that's going to have friendlier policies and better incentives for me to build my data center or my business there, and I can recruit locally. I don't have to go recruit out of state.
And to piggyback off of what you're saying, coming from a law enforcement perspective, I heard someone once say that you can't have prosperity without security.
Yeah.
And it just so true.
People
I
want
mean,
safe neighborhoods. They
so,
want.
Yeah. So if you're a business owner, right, and you're looking to relocate, well, not only do you want an environment that's maybe tax friendly or business friendly or whatever, but you also want your employees to be safe, right? You want
Yeah.
your infrastructure, your capital, your everything
Your
that your
investment,
investment to be safe.
Yeah.
You don't want it to be burnt to the ground, for lack of a better way of putting it. But how would I kind of think about it as a business owner. Would I want to go in there, into a city that's having a lot of crime issues, and then you make a great point about education. Where's your talent going to come from,
Yeah.
right? So those are two valid points that should be addressed, especially when you're thinking about strategy. How are we gonna get our community where it should be? Because I know that we have some very talented people here, and unfortunately, they do leave.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that it reminds me of is trying to find a doctor now, for example.
Yeah.
But
you can find a trial lawyer. You can find a trial lawyer. Like any corner you turn, you're going to find a sign of a trial lawyer. Like, you need to sue a doctor. They're there. And that is right. Like, and what frustrates me about that is that because we do have a significant population that is living below the poverty line, they can't advocate for themselves. They just can't easily get up and say, I'm going to MD Anderson in Houston, or I'm going to the Mayo Clinic in Phoenix. Unless you have the resources available to you where you can do that, and you could take off from work, or you have a good health insurance so that you can go to Mayo or MD Anderson to advocate for yourself. I mean, you're stuck here in New Mexico, and if you can't find a doctor or a specialist, I mean, it's crazy to me. We had an individual who works closely with us who hurt her knee, and she couldn't see a primary care physician for almost 8-9 months or something like that. Almost a year out.
Crazy.
Like it's wild. Like, and more doctors are leaving the state because our terrible medical malpractice. But again, I think these are just a number of issues that go into it. And one of these days, I think people are going to wake up and be like, wait, I can't get care for my illness, or I can't see a specialist. I mean, cardiologists are hard to find now too. I mean, it's...
I was just thinking of that guy that the settlement was $400 and some million from here in Albuquerque. And I'm thinking, well, maybe that's why a lot of the lawyers don't want to have sort of a cap on how much.
You take 40% or 30% of those millions. I mean,
make a lot of
it's
money.
a good business, right?
Absolutely.
But I always tell people, I'm like, you can't put a price on an emotional toll, or at the end of the day, I think there needs to be protections. And any good doctor that I've ever talked to, they agree. You do need a very balanced medical malpractice landscape where bad actors will be held accountable, but you don't do it on the backs of the folks doing good work, or who are in it for the right reasons, or are not making these bad choices. And so there needs to be a consequence, but you don't do it to penalize the rest who are doing things in good faith. And that to me is the biggest problem. And I always tell people, I'm like, if you're injured, what's the difference between $1 million and $100 million? Either way, if you really suffered emotional damage or whatever it may be, there's no price you can put on that. And it's similar to your all's experience, is that no dollar figure could ever replace what you guys ever went through, right? Like, even if there was a settlement or anything for money, like it doesn't fix what happened. And that's the same thing I think about from the medical malpractice, is that if you are injured, yes, cool, your lawyer got you $400 million, but are you still suffering at the end of the day? And so, and not to say that doctor was in the wrong and maybe deserved it, but when you're bankrupting rural hospitals, that's the only lifeline for people living in rural New Mexico, it's a dangerous slope, and you have to be very cautious, because eventually you're going to wake up one day and there's not going to be a hospital or a resource available to you. And I think about people like my parents who live in rural New Mexico, and access to healthcare is very difficult. And it's life and death. If you have to travel an hour or 2 hours away to see a doctor, that could be your life right there.
Yeah. I remember we lived in Torrance County, a small village by the name of Torreon, right on.
Oh yeah, Torreon, yeah.
foothills of the Manzanos, and we had a doctor in Mount Air, Dr. Saul. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but he was the best doctor in the world. You know, you could go in there and he would treat just about anybody. I don't think he ever kept any notes, medical notes on it, because I remember when we moved to Albuquerque and I wanted to get another doctor,
They wanted your records. I don't have one. I've seen a doctor.
But if he would treat you, man, he was the best doctor in my opinion. He was really good. But,
super nice guy.
I think the Presbyterian now, I think, has a clinic. I don't even know if they have a nurse practitioner, I think, in Mountain Air or something like that. But it's scarce. It's not the type of medical facilities that you would like to have for people in the rural areas, There's a great need for hospitals and clinics out there.
Yeah. But we need some common sense solutions. We need common sense policies where justice is available to you, but then there's also, hey, we're not going to allow trial lawyers to wreak havoc, or we're not going to allow repeat offenders to roam our streets. There needs to be a mix of accountability, but also some solutions to just balance the scales. Right. Because I feel like on everything from crime to education to economy, the scales are just tilted like this now.
Right.
And we need to kind of bring that back down.
Yeah, you made a great point. I think I'm paraphrasing what you said, but to complain about things, and say, okay, this is what happened. This is why, either Albuquerque, the state of New Mexico, here's all these problems. That's why we do what we do. And that's why my dad wants to keep Jackie's memory alive.
Absolutely.
It's an honor of her, but we don't want, and I know my dad, and especially Kevin, don't want this to happen to anybody else. Yeah. It was a tragedy, and a life sentence comes with it, right? Yeah, that's what how my dad put it one time, and several other people. But we don't want to just complain about it. We want to do something about it, and it's unfortunate that nobody returned calls except for the one person, and it's unfortunate that our concerns were dismissed. But
do you feel like other families who have been victims of crime, that's why maybe they're not as vocal or maybe don't get engaged, because they've just kind of lost faith in the policymaking realm, and they just feel like, we'll cope with it, but we really don't see an opportunity for change here?
Yeah, it gets to the point, I think, where I wanted to say, forget it. I don't want to say anymore anything or do anything because it's very frustrating, because you always believed in these people being open to at least talk to you. They don't have to agree with me or with,
But let's have a conversation. Let's try to figure out some solutions. Yeah. Like, hey, why wasn't this individual at this rap sheet behind bars before November 19th, given all those crimes that happened? Why was he not behind bars?
And that was my intent when I called the mayor. I thought, well, I want to help. I want to be part of the solution to the crime, because crime was going up really bad. Mm-hmm. I think Jackie was the 82nd or 84th murder in Albuquerque that year. I forget.
Was that the year that it broke the record?
Believe so.
Yeah. I know it was 2019 or 2020 around there. Like it was.
I think it was probably the following year.
But
crime had already gone up substantially, by 2019. But that was my intent. I couldn't believe that, to me, if you're an elected official, your job is to represent the whole community.
Yeah, regardless, Republican or Democrat, you represent your constituents.
Exactly, that's such a good point. Yeah,
not just a select group of people.
Yeah.
That's not good policy.
It made me wonder. I'm gonna put this out there. It really made me wonder because of the circumstances, and at that time, sanctuary cities were a hot topic. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah,
it was a hot topic.
Like I think 2018 to 2020 was the big boom of sanctuary cities.
Right, and there was so this is when President Trump too was also hey, what's going on with these sanctuary cities? I'm starting to notice that these sanctuary cities have higher rates of crime, and there was statistical data that was tagged along with that. And because of what happened, it makes me wonder. Now, I can't prove this, of course, but it makes me wonder if it was intentionally ignored. Like people just didn't want to touch it. People didn't want to. Maybe people in office didn't want to maybe get involved because it was boiling over. And because we're what I would consider a progressive state, and most people or the politics surrounding immigrant-friendly or sanctuary cities is there, and it's very popular, like with the current mayor here, the governor, and everything like that. They didn't want anything negative reflecting on that particular support of sanctuary cities, which is unfortunate because I think you said it best. Regardless of your politics, regardless if you're Democrat, Republican, and you're in office, you should be listening to everybody, and you should be taking everybody's perspective into account, especially when something like this happens, when a tragedy this big has happened. It took us going all the way to Washington, D.C. to get something done. Yeah. It was, again, thanks to President Trump. I don't know if anything would have happened if he didn't get involved, to be honest with you.
My personal thinking was that if he hadn't gotten involved, this guy would have probably been gone to Mexico and never to be found again.
Yeah. Well, and that story right there, what sticks with me is because you read the news and you see what people say about the president. They say he lacks compassion, he lacks empathy, he doesn't care about people. And what you've told me today is complete opposite.
Oh, yeah,
he was probably so compassionate with you all, and the fact that he knew the case, he knew who you were, but he wanted to help. Like, to me, that's compassion. The moment someone says, you suffered a great tragedy, what can we do to help? Like, let me put my resources on it. Like, that to me is compassion. Like, that to me. And so I struggle now because I see social media and I get so frustrated because people are like, he's the worst, he's terrible, he doesn't care about people. But then I have you two who actually sat down at a table with him telling me, no, he cared. Like, he cared.
He
like,
did, and he does.
And that, to me, I think more people need to hear that story about our president who cared.
I remember, he set up a stage, a podium, 2 podiums, actually. One was for him, and then he'd call me up to go up there and talk for just a few minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes, whatever it was, And I remember, I'll never forget this. Well, as I was coming down after I talked, him telling me, Sam, he says, we're going to take care of this. And to me, that, and he did. That's the thing,
That he followed through.
A few days later, there was an FBI agent at my house, and it began to roll,
And I think most people, like, when they hear a politician say that, they don't believe they're going to follow through. Like, and I always, like, I don't look at President Trump as a politician because he's not. Like,
exactly.
He had no reason to run for president. He was a multi-billionaire. Like, there was no other than, seeing America do better.
Exactly.
Was
he
his
just
reason.
cared, right? Yeah. He actually cared.
And to risk it all. I mean, when you're a business focused individual and you have businesses, it's a big risk to take on politics because you could ruin your business. But also, you move away from the business side and you go into the political side. So you kind of put that on the back burner. I mean, that's pretty selfless. And the fact that I think one thing that always sticks with me, and I always tell people, I'm like, this guy's not getting paid. Like, he has turned down his $400,000 a year salary and donates it each year to charities and, to other causes. I mean, like, talk about selfless. Like, I wish more people talked about that. Like, I don't understand why people are just so strung out on just hating him that I'm like, there's some great things here. Like, what other president has been like, I don't want the salary. I'm here for a reason. I want to help America become great. And, and regardless of the controversial topics, like, this is what I believe needs to be done. We need stronger borders. We need, stronger looks at immigration. We need to clean up our cities. We need to go after criminals. We need to just, invest more in our country. We need to, fix problems here at home. And the fact that he's created peace in the Middle East, that's like, wow. It's not something that you see all the time. And so I think it's great. I'm excited for people just hear just your story and I got to ask because, we're coming up here towards the end, but again, I feel like a lot of victims' families just don't want to come out and speak. So as those individuals who are here being outspoken, what would you say to them? Why should they get involved? Because I think here at the Chile Wire, I want people to call me and say, saw your podcast with Sam and Raul. Our family was impacted. We want to tell our story. We want to start telling people what's happening and how, the system has failed us. And I think a lot of times it takes people who have that bond to understand what they're going through to say, hey, you need to be outspoken. You need to get involved.
The only way that there's going to be, that if hopefully eventually there'll be some change is by getting involved, talking about what happened, speaking out the truth in terms of policies that are bad for the community, people that don't respond to calls that only talk to certain people. People need to know that, because they're supposed to represent everybody also, And if you don't talk about it, well, they just go on their merry way and never change.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hard, I think, for my dad, and I know Kevin and everybody else that loved and cared for Jackie. But I think we're at a point where we feel it's our responsibility to keep her memory alive, right, Dad?
Absolutely, yes.
And to make sure that we do our best to bring awareness to these types of situations, and hopefully we are able to influence some kind of change that will, make our city and our state safer, maybe even nationally, when it comes to border security. I think that's a huge deal, and we can't emphasize it enough. I think, again, just circling back real quick, Jackie was an immigrant herself. We're not saying we don't want immigrants. We just want criminals to stay out of our country, and we want our communities to be safe. We want it done the right way, and our family story is something that needs to be shared, and I think it needs to be heard, and people need to be aware of it, because it's easy to get caught up in the politics and thinking that you're morally virtuous because you support it, but you got to look at the whole picture of immigration. Mm-hmm. You have to look at the whole picture and see, okay, we have to be selective as to who is coming into our country. It's important that we screen out these criminals. We need to be aware of that.
And what I see is that when I just having this conversation with you all is that you just don't want to see another family have to go through it.
Oh, no.
It's
something that's so hurtful, so it's hard to even describe, how it feels, how what you have to go through, and the thing there's no end to it until you die. That's probably the last, but you just have to live with it for the rest of your life. And a lot of people say you need to get on with it, and you do. You move on and you try to do the best you can, but that hurt never goes away. Yeah. It's always there, and I'm sure that a lot of the victims out there that hopefully, or some of them probably feel about the same way that I do. It's just not something that'll ever go away. Yeah. And there's a need for more conversations with victims, in terms of when it comes to the judicial system, because Absolutely. We should be heard. People need to know that it's not an easy thing to take when your loved one is taken from you for no reason at all. Yeah. And they need to listen, I hope.
Yeah, one person can't do it alone.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, Raul, it's been an absolute pleasure and honor to have you on the Chile Wire. I look forward to having you both back on in the future, and just appreciate you taking the time to advocate, but also to keep Jackie's story and life around, and, just honoring her legacy and using it to just see New Mexico become so much better, and that you haven't lost belief that New Mexico can't be changed for the better. And I think that's important, is that there's still people out there like myself and like you that believe New Mexico can be amazing.
Yeah, we're not giving up. We're not going to give up.
Yeah, we're not going to give up.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, before we wrap up, I got to ask, because I always ask this of my guests, red or green? Red or green chili? Red or green chili?
I say Christmas.
Christmas? All right.
Green.
Green. Awesome. All right.
I played it safe.
I'm usually green, but every now and then I go with the red. Well, Sam, Raul, thank you guys so much.
You.
And that's it for this week's Chile Wire, y'all. We'll see you next time.